Once we have determined which psychic organ is in a state of imbalance, the next thing is to repair that organ, which is nothing other than replacing the damaged part with something that works. Therefore, the question that immediately arises is what particular aspect of your psychic organ is not working. Think of this repair process as similar to what happens when you have an organ transplant. The organ that does not work is changed for one that does. The same goes for objects. When we repair a car, we know that it fails because one of its parts has stopped working. So what we do is identify the part that doesn't work and we change it for one that does. That was precisely the purpose of you identifying the psychic organ that you had compromised, which is what we did in the previous section. So what happens if it is your ego that is compromised? You already know that the ego is the psychic organ that is responsible for generating confidence so that you can enjoy the reality in which you live. And above all, so that you think about your own convenience before that of other people. To repair a damaged ego, what we have to do is restore balance so what you don't feel guilty for thinking of yourself before others, which as you can see is what is failing at this moment and explains why there are people who take advantage of you or why you yourself cannot enjoy and trust your own decisions. Therefore, if you already know that it is guilt that is causing you to not be able to enjoy your life, I want you to think about what generates that state of guilt that you feel at this moment. Now, how do you resolve the issue of guilt? What if I told you that you are not responsible for other people's lives and that you have every right to do what you want without thinking about how each of your choices will affect others? Because that is where you are going to find the solution to an ego problem. Therefore, I want you to think for a moment about everything you have wanted throughout your life and that you have prevented yourself from having because you thought of others before yourself. If you want to do it more specifically, I want you to think about one thing that was very special to you and that you denied because you had thought about others because they made you feel guilty of sorrows in yourself before in others. And on that basis, I want you to see yourself having it and enjoying life. What's happening? Do you feel that the perception that others have of you has changed? As you might have already realized, no. But as you can see, that is the spell that your psyche subjects you to. If you notice, just with these questions, I have already begun to generate a neuropsychic change in you, which will allow you to gradually balance your ego. You must consider that the repair of a damaged ego is something that carries out within the framework of a specific therapy for this psychic organ. Here, I am giving you just a glimpse of what you can achieve once you decide to repair that part of your psyche that is affected. That will be precisely what will allow you to heal from everything that affects you and strengthen your psyche in the process. What happens if it is your soul that is affected? As you already know, the soul is the organ of your psychic system where your essence is located, the part of you that remains unchanged. Therefore, you already know that soul problems have to do with your inability to accept what you want to do in life and those aspects of your personality that are so essential to yourself, but that you deny, either due to the influence of other people that torment you, or because in your past they made you believe that who you were brought misfortune to the people around you. An example that I can give you in this regard is that of Princess Elsa from Frozen. What was the essence of air? Making ice. But what happened? Due to a family misfortune, she ended up believing that this quality of hers was what hurt people. So, as the first phase of this process of repairing your soul, I want you to think precisely about that quality of yours that for many years you have shied away from because you were made to believe that it hurt others or because you yourself came to believe that. Once you have identified your talent, I want you to think about the first moments in your life when that special talent of yours manifested itself. How you felt when that happened. I am sure that before the trauma that blocked your soul, you enjoyed it a lot. Now, I want you to think about what you could do with your talent. What would happen if you did exactly what you were meant to do? You feel like it could change your life? I am sure. Therefore, I want you to take a moment to think about yourself using your talent and enjoying it and receiving the admiration of others for what you do. Let's now look at the self system. As you remember, this is an organ of your psyche which is responsible for activating the different personalities that live in you. And they allow you to make your way of being more flexible depending on the circumstances you experience. The problem of the ego state is always associated with not getting the part of your being right that must be activated for a given moment. You behave like a son when you have to behave like a father. You behave like a slave when you have to transform yourself into a warrior. To begin repairing this organ, the first thing I want you to do is think about the self states that you use the most. You're a parent most of the time. You're a boss of some subordinates. Or, on the contrary, you're an employee of other people. What do you think would be the circumstance that causes you the most problems? For example, there are people who tell me in the consultation, I can't find a partner. The question that arises is, do you think you don't know how to activate your romantic self-state? If you look closely, there are people who do not know how to activate their Don Juan or Cleopatra self, in the case of women, in circumstances in which they must be seductive for others. Once we have identified the part of yourself that is not suited to the specific circumstances in which it must work, the next thing I want you to think about is what the self-state would be like if it were functioning correctly. For example, there are parents who behave with their children as if they were also children. Many of the problems I face in my practice have to do with this. It is possible that your father or your mother is a child who is always throwing tantrums at you. If you notice, the frustrations you have with him or her, if it is your mother, have to do with her activating an ego state that does not correspond to those circumstances. What do you do when that happens? Well, you must develop a self-state that suits that specific person. All of this is part of the process of transforming the state of the self and the architecture of the self, which come in the therapy corresponding to this organ. Here, the only thing I want you to observe is that you must learn to recognize which part of yourself does not work for you, and on that basis, repair it, defining an appropriate self-state for that specific circumstance. Let's now look at the spirit, which is the organ of your psyche that is responsible for keeping your motivation high because it is related to the hope you might have that your life will improve if you do what God or the gods, depending on your beliefs, want from you. As we saw in the previous section, the spirit is broken when we interact with people who are dedicated to breaking our spirit. Those types of people who are always telling us about how terrible life is and that you will never achieve anything, no matter how hard you try. Because in turn, they themselves have their spirit broken. Sometimes, it is circumstances that break you. You experience so many traumatic situations that at some point you stop believing that if you do the right thing, you will have the kind of life you want. To repair the spirit, the first thing is to define what person or circumstances it is that makes you lose the motivation. I want you to think about the person who breaks your ability the most, to motivate you to do things well, because if you do, your life will improve. I want you to think the same thing in relation to your life circumstances. What was your most traumatic moment? The one where you said, no matter how hard I try, I am not going to achieve anything in life. Once we have identified that, I want you to now think about the opposite effect. What if I told you that there is a time when you have achieved everything you want? I want you to think about a specific time in your life where you did something by being honest, being fair, not cheating, not upsetting other people, where you achieved something. I am sure you have many examples of this type, because you are a great person. Don't have any doubt about it. Now, I want you to think about times in your life when something great, something good, happened to you just because. Those moments when you didn't expect anything good to happen to you and yet the universe or God gave you a great gift. Examples of this abound. Maybe at some point you found a great love that was unexpected for you. Or maybe you got some material benefit that you didn't expect to happen. Some people see in their children that great gift that life gives them. I am sure that in this small period, you somehow felt your spirit grow bigger. Let's now move on the psychic heart, which, as you know, is the organ that is responsible for linking you with other people or circumstances that are important to you. Psychic cardiology is a quite complex topic because it involves defining what you are experiencing on a physical level due to the trauma you have faced. For example, you might have felt like your heart broke into 1,000 pieces, and each of those pieces continues to hurt your chest, as if you were exposing yourself to a series of broken glass which lacerates that specific part of your body. The key to repairing a damaged heart for this specific case is to put the heart back together part by part, so that with the passage of time, it does not continue to break, and in turn generate more pieces, which will continue to lacerate your psyche. If your heart is broken right now or your chest hurts, I want you to think about times when your heart was filled with happiness because there were people who valued you a lot. It doesn't even have to be with specific people. It might be that you had a pet who gave you a lot of love. Or it could even be a moment when the universe gave you something beautiful to see. For example, it is possible that at some point in your life, you were in a place in the world that was very beautiful, where everything was peaceful, and where you felt completely linked with everything around you. If you notice, by talking about all this, we are reactivating that part of your psyche that for now is affected by an unconscious desire not to bond with others. When you realize that you have been blessed by establishing that link with other beings, you can notice how, little by little, your heart begins to repair itself. And finally, let's look at your self-esteem, which is the organ of your psyche that is related to your personal value. That value that you perceive, that others give you, but that you also give yourself. Deep down, this is the part of your psyche that allows you to observe how great you are. But the problem is that there are people who stop seeing themselves as what they are, as valuable people because of some emotional trauma. If your partner left you, your self-esteem is hurt. The same thing happens if you have had a traumatic relationship with your parents, siblings, or at school or at work. Therefore, you can now see that repairing your self-esteem is associated with recovering your ability to value yourself. To do this, I want you to think about how great you are. I want you to think about a moment in your existence where you felt very cool, where you did something for which others admired you. I am sure you have many such examples. The key is always to induce yourself to remember those moments, because that will be precisely what will allow you to once again appreciate the great value and potential that you have for the world. As you can see, through this neurosubliminal procedure, which I carried out through the questions I asked you throughout this section, I generate a whole change in your neuropsychic structure, which is the purpose of a repair process in this field. Now, as I indicated, you must consider that the repair of a damaged organ is something that is carried out within the framework of a specific therapy for each of these psychic organs that we have worked on here. Think about everything you can achieve once you decide to repair the part of your psyche that is damaged by emotional trauma. Not only you will heal from what made you suffer, but above all, you will strengthen your psyche. In the next section, we are going to work on the next phase of healing, which is cicatrice. I see you there.